Hello watch enthusiasts, and welcome to Watch Chronicler. Today I'd like to discuss a watch which was a bizarre and fascinating failure in its day, but which showed what would be the future once materials had caught up. This was the IWC 3508 Ingénieur, a highly technical watch from the brand which gave us the Mark 11 pilot's watch, and which pioneered ceramic cases. And please note that this video will be more concise than those which you've seen before on this channel, as the full feature is now available at watchchronicler.com for you to read. Before that, however, I'd like to announce that watchchronicler.com, this news source for sharp, in-depth articles and videos on watches and the design, technology and people behind them, is now live. So take a look at watchchronicler.com for all the latest news on the watch world, and look out for daily articles covering everything from the history of ceramic watches to an explanation of Rolex's overwhelming success, and news of Seiko's new automatic chronographs. Also, do remember to like, share and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to always be notified when new content is available. Do also follow Watch Chronicler on Instagram to see everything from macro photography to watch news, and also to be the first to hear about new articles and videos. As is so often discussed, the eminent designer Gérald Genta gave the watch industry a new approach in 1972. His creation of the luxury steel watch with an integrated bracelet in the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak radically changed the design of new watches for the next 2 decades. And as a result, an economically concerned IWC was keen to work with Genta to create a new face for their aging Ingénieur model. The result was the iconic 1976 IWC Ingénieur SL, reference 1832. This watch stepped away from the old Ingénieur with a patterned dial and integrated bracelet. However, with a fully brushed surface, a soft iron core for 1000 Gauss antimagnetic rating, and a screwed bezel with 120 meter water resistance, it fulfilled the promise of its name, something which earlier, much dressier Ingénieurs simply didn't when compared to models like the Rolex Milgauss or the Omega Railmaster. The movement used in this piece was the 8541 ES, an antimagnetic and hacking variant of the venerable 8541B. It used a Breguet overcoil hairspring and sat in rubber mounts to absorb shocks. For these reasons, it's all the more unfortunate that the reference 1832 was a commercial flop during its years of production. This was all the more unfortunate since it essentially doomed the use of IWC's in-house movements in this range in a time of economic instability. However, in response, IWC launched a brand new Ingénieur in 1983 with some very major changes and also a different approach. And so IWC released the reference 3505, which turned the 1832 into a more delicate, so-called Skinny Ingenieur. The new model featured a 34mm case with a very similar design aesthetic, thus echoing the existing lines of their range. However, notable changes were seen in the now sharper edges and the finer bezel to fit the new size. Most noticeably, whilst the 1832 offered a rather hefty 40mm case, the 3505 gave the same specifications in a 34mm size of only 9mm in thickness. The dial was also adjusted with a simpler graph paper pattern and a set of golden baton-style markers. In this combination, it was a true successor to the anti-magnetic dress watches of the 1950s and 1960s produced by IWC, rather than the more technical inspiration of the 1970s. The very noticeable change in size between this watch and its predecessor was based upon a mechanical change which marked a new era in the development of the Ingénieur. Gone was the in-house movement, and in its place was found the caliber 375, a change of movement philosophy entirely. Based upon the ETA 2892, the watch received a more modern beat rate and 21 joules, but at the expense of the various technologies included within the older movement. From these specifications, one could be forgiven for establishing that IWC was easing back on its collections. However, in reality, this is an assumption which would be rather misguided, as this was an industry-wide theme as it became increasingly difficult to make profits in the 1980s through changing developments in the market and through quartz watches too. As a side note, one must remember that the views held today against third-party movements in the luxury watch industry did not widely exist in the 1980s due to a very different and in fact much smaller watch collecting community. And so as a result, the choice of using an ETA movement inside this watch did make an awful lot of sense, considering the fact that they wanted to make the watch slimmer and smaller, but also the fact that this was a watch which needed to be robust and reliable, something which this ETA movement really did offer, especially in a time of economic instability. Another advantage of the ETA 2892, although I don't know if it was chosen for this reason, was the fact that it was very heavily modifiable. And we've seen this both in what IWC did with this movement later on, which is inherently reliable and also very accurate, but also what Omega, for instance, did with it, as they developed it to be a coaxial movement as well, showing the versatility of this mechanism. But the watch to which the 3508 owes a lot, that's to say the watch at the core of this video, is the Ocean 2000 titanium dive watch, a piece produced in the early 1980s in collaboration between Porsche Design and IWC. And using the strength and lightness of titanium to offer a 2000 meter water resistance, IWC also engineered their way around needing a helium escape valve. Importantly for the Ingénieur, this watch was used quite extensively by the German military, and so as a result was used for a variety of different tasks, including in one variant as a minesweeper watch. And for this very reason, IWC created an entirely amagnetic version of the ETA 2892 for this particular titanium dive watch. The reason for this in the military version was safety around easily detonated mines, but such impressive technology could just as well be applied to civilian watches, especially ones designed to be resilient and resistant to magnetic fields. Aside from pure innovation, the objective of this model was to help shift attention from Porsche design models back to IWC themselves. This model ultimately came in 1989 with the introduction of the reference 3508, a sort of Super Ingenieur. Retaining the 34mm case of the existing Ingénieur range, the 3508 kept up the same water resistance and discreet charm of its predecessor. Yet I think that what makes this particular reference so interesting to me is the fact that it could very well be the most elegant of all Ingénieurs, despite also being one of the most overtly technical. Where previous models had patterned dials and enhanced markers at 12 o'clock, this embodied a more austere, timeless aesthetic. The dial was glossy in black or white, and the markers were golden alongside the hands. Aside from the dressy looks, the true aims of the watch were stated on the dial as 500,000 amperes per meter. For perspective, the benchmark for anti-magnetism at the time was 1000 Gauss or 80,000 amperes per meter, and most watches nowadays with a decent mechanical movement will be resistant inherently to 4800 amperes per meter. And for most basic tasks, that 60 Gauss simple anti-magnetic rating is really enough to survive life. So you can imagine how baffling it is to realise that in reality the figure held by this IWC was a vast understatement of the movement's true capabilities. In testing it was able to survive 3.9 million amperes per meter, just over 49,000 Gauss. However, as much as I wish that I could declare the watch an overwhelming success, this sadly was not the case. From conservative anti-magnetic methods in the Rolex Milgauss to unique new Omega movements, accuracy and reliability remain major considerations before all else. By contrast, IWC achieved its anti-magnetism at the expense of those very factors. Certainly one can't deny the cleverness at play within the 3508. During the 1980s, IWC had become aware that the soft iron core style of anti-magnetism was very limited. As a result, to move beyond the 1000 Gauss level of magnetic resistance, IWC needed a movement itself to be amagnetic. They responded to such a need with the brilliant caliber 35790, an evolution of the ETA 2892-A2 with a niobium zirconium hairspring and ruby rotor bearings. The result was a watch which was actually slightly slimmer than its predecessor due to not needing all of the internal case cladding to resist magnetism. Unfortunately, the movement was fundamentally flawed. IWC chose niobium zirconium for the hairspring in order to prevent magnetism from shortening it, thus causing the watch to run fast. Problematically, any small fluctuation in temperature rendered the watch totally inaccurate, an ironic issue for a watch virtually immune to magnetism, a far greater foe of most clockwork. As you can imagine, with a maximum of 3,000 being made in the short production run from 1989 to 1992, this watch was a commercial and mechanical failure. Yet I do not feel that this failure was as ignominious as it's often portrayed. Modern anti-magnetism has come courtesy of the wonders of silicon springs, a technology which did not appear until the year 2000, and since the 1930s, a number of brands have experimented with different materials for their springs so as to give anti-magnetism, but none of the results have been similar to what we have today with silicon. And so for a watch of the 1980s, this piece was radically ahead of its time, despite its inherent shortcomings. And had it worked, possibly with the help of modern materials, it could perhaps have become the ultimate expression of Genta's concept of a stainless steel luxury watch and a pioneer in the world of anti-magnetism. In any case, the phenomenal engineering which gave us this watch must be celebrated, along with its sheer quirkiness in terms of doing something really very different. I will, however, conclude the video there, but please do tell me what you thought of the video in the comments down below, and head over to watchchronicler.com for more information, in addition to liking, sharing and subscribing. So thank you very much for watching. This is Armand the Watch Guy from watchchronicler.com. Out.